Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So we're going to continue with our last topic for chapter 2, which is written sources of law, which is subsidiary legislation. So what is subsidiary legislation? Subsidiary legislation are laws made through powers given by the legislature to a body or person via enabling or parent statute. So what does it mean? When the legislative bodies, they make acts, we call it as parent act. Alright, so this parent act, they have the power to delegate their law making power to a body or persons, to make rules and regulations. An act cannot consist of everything inside the act, right? Or else it will become very thick act, right? So what we do is that we delegate some of the powers to legislate the law, to a body, so that that body can make laws, that is consistent with the parent statute, so that they can make rules and regulations which are more detailed, and more suitable for the people. Alright, so that is subsidiary legislation. So why we need subsidiary legislation? Because the first one is that legislature, they have insufficient time. They cannot legislate everything. They cannot as I say, right, so they cannot cram everything in one act and expect them to cover all matters involving that act or that specific matters. So what they do, they delegate to a body or person to make rules and regulations in details. But that rules and regulations or subsidiary legislation must be consistent with the parent act. Right. So the second reason is legislature is not continuously in session and its legislative procedures are cumbersome, which means that they're not usually sitting, right? Legislature, they're busy people. So they cannot sit every day and make laws. So they have to delegate their power to somebody to make a detailed law or rules and regulations, right? The third reason why we need subsidiary legislation is because it is better we leave the highly technical aspects of the legislation to the experts or administrators on the job. So usually in some field they have their own experts. So sometimes these experts, they know more about how to make rules and regulations in that particular field. So it's better for them to do the laws or rules and regulations instead of the parliament, right? So that is why we need subsidiary legislation. So how do we control subsidiary legislation? So there are few mechanisms that we can on how we can control subsidiary legislation. Alright, so the first one is by judicial control. Judicial control is where the court have control over subsidiary legislation through judicial review. So what is judicial review? Judicial review is a process where you apply to the High Court to review on a certain matter or a certain decision made by the certain body. So that is judicial review. So how you can control it is that you apply by way of judicial review to the court to review the subsidiary legislation, whether it is consistent or inconsistent with the federal constitution or the parent act itself. Okay, if there is any inconsistency of the subsidiary legislation with the parent act and or the federal constitution, then the court may declare that subsidiary legislation to be void, because why? It is inconsistent. Okay, all right. The second mechanism is by legislative control. Okay, so legislative control involves legislature. The enabling act, okay, they may require the subsidiary legislation to be laid before the legislature. Okay, right? So before we pass or before we make the subsidiary legislation, okay, we would present it to the legislature. So if the legislature feels that okay, it is okay, then we can pass the subsidiary legislation. Okay, if not, then cannot. Right? Okay. The third one is by consultation. Okay, consultation, right? Where you consult to an expert or you consult before you make the law or subsidiary legislation. Okay, it is not compulsory, but if needed, then you may have to consult before you make or before you make subsidiary legislation. All right. Okay, so that is the third mechanism, and the last mechanism is by publication. Okay, right. As usual, there is no provision which makes that publication is a formal requirement before a subsidiary legislation can be enacted. But some enabling act, okay, some parent act, they may require for the subsidiary legislation to be published. Okay, if the subsidiary legislation is not published, then that subsidiary legislation may become void. But that depends on the parent act. If the parent act provides for it, then it is void if you did not publish it. But the parent act did not state that it should be published, then you're okay to go. You can just enforce the subsidiary legislation. Okay, so that is it with the subsidiary legislation. Very simple. Okay, very easy to understand. Okay, should you have any question, you can ask me in the next session. Thank you.